I never expected to be at war with my HOA, but when they falsely claimed my family farm was their public campsite and started building facilities on my land, I had no choice but to fight back. What would you do if strangers were camping on your property and a corrupt HOA president with a judge husband was trying to steal your land? Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this. The buzz of dirt bikes woke me at 7:30 a.m. on Saturday. I jumped out of bed, confused and angry. Who would be riding on my property? I grabbed my boots and rushed outside to find 3 teenagers zipping across my north field, crushing the winter wheat I'd planted last fall. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arms. "This is private property. You need to leave now." The kids stopped, looking confused. One pulled off his helmet and pointed to a small sign I'd never seen before at the edge of my field. It read, "Pinehurst Gardens Community Recreation Area." "The HOA lady said we could ride here," the tallest boy explained. "She gave us permission yesterday." My blood boiled as I walked over to inspect the sign. It was new, professionally made, and firmly planted in my soil. I'd inherited this 40-acre farm from my grandfather, who'd worked this land since the 1940s, long before the fancy Pinehurst Garden subdivision sprouted up next door 5 years ago. I don't care what the HOA lady said. This is Richardson family property has been for over 70 years. The boys looked at each other, shrugged, and thankfully left without argument. I yanked the sign out of the ground and marched back to my house, ready to make some calls. This wasn't the first time the Pinehurst HOA had tried to push me around, but planting signs and sending people onto my land had crossed a serious line. I dialed Mrs. Lockhart, the HOA president, who answered on the 4th ring with a honey-sweet voice that turned cold the moment I identified myself. "Mr. Richardson, what seems to be the problem now?" Her tone dripped with annoyance. "You put up signs on my land and told kids they could ride bikes in my wheat field. That's the problem." "Oh dear, I think you're confused again. That area is designated community recreational space according to our master plan. You should check your deed carefully." "My deed is perfectly clear, Mrs. Lockhart. Your subdivision ends 50 yards before my north field begins. You know this?" She sighed dramatically. "Well, the board disagrees. We have documentation showing that parcel was rezoned years ago. I suggest you speak with your lawyer before making accusations." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, gripping my coffee mug so tightly I thought it might shatter. My neighbor Elaine, the only friendly face from Pinehurst Gardens, had warned me this might happen. The HOA had been eyeing my land for expansion since their community pool project fell through last year. I spent the rest of Saturday checking my property boundaries and taking photos of the damaged wheat. The loss wasn't catastrophic, but the violation of my space left me feeling sick to my stomach. My late wife Sarah had loved that field, saying the golden wheat against our blue mountain backdrop was the prettiest sight in the valley. Sunday morning brought worse news. I woke to the sound of voices, lots of them. From my bedroom window, I spotted at least 20 people with tents, coolers, and camping gear spreading across my north field. 2 men were unfolding a portable toilet near my irrigation access point. I threw on clothes and raced outside, trying to remain calm despite my racing heart. "Excuse me," I called out to the closest group, a family unloading camping chairs from an expensive-looking SUV. "I'm sorry, but you're on private property. This isn't a campground." The father, dressed in high-end outdoor gear, looked at me with confusion. "This is the Pinehurst Gardens Community Campsite. We reserved it weeks ago through the HOA. I'm James Richardson. This is my farm. There is no campsite here." A woman approached, holding a printed map. "Look, it's right here on the official community map. The HOA sent this with our reservation confirmation." She pointed to a clearly marked community campground on what was absolutely my property. More campers gathered around as I tried to explain, but they all had the same map, the same story. The HOA had told them this was community land. "I understand you were misled," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But this is my farm, not HOA property. I'm going to have to ask everyone to pack up and leave." "We paid good money for these reservations," someone shouted from the back. "That's between you and the HOA," I replied. "I suggest you contact Mrs. Lockhart for a refund." As tensions rose, I noticed a black Range Rover pull up on the access road. Mrs. Lockhart stepped out, immaculately dressed in white pants and a pastel blouse despite the early hour. She surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes before plastering on a smile and approaching us. "Good morning, everyone. Is there a problem?" she asked, ignoring me completely. "This man says we're trespassing," the father explained. Mrs. Lockhart laughed lightly. "Oh, Mr. Richardson is just confused about the property lines. This area has been community land for quite some time." "That's a lie," I said firmly. "Show me where I ever agreed to give up my land." She turned to me, smile never wavering. "The agreement was signed in 2008, Mr. Richardson. The board has all the paperwork. Now, if you'll excuse me, these nice people have camping plans. I never signed anything in 2008 or any other year." Mrs. Lockhart turned to the campers. "Please enjoy your day. Mr. Richardson won't cause any more trouble." She shot me a warning look. "Unless he wants to discuss this matter with our attorneys." As she walked away, I felt trapped. One man against 20 confused campers and an HOA, with apparently forged documents. I returned to my house and immediately called my lawyer, leaving an urgent message. When I looked out my window again, I saw children playing tag through my damaged wheat, someone setting up a volleyball net, and Mrs. Lockhart watching me from her Range Rover with a satisfied smile. I grabbed my property folder and my camera. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. How could they possibly think they'd get away with stealing my land in broad daylight? Monday morning found me sitting in my lawyer's office, pushing a stack of photos across his desk. Frank Watson had been my family's attorney for 30 years, and I'd never seen him look so concerned. "They installed a portable toilet on your property without permission," Frank asked, examining the pictures. "And they're telling people it's a community campsite." "Look at this." I showed him the map a camper had given me. "They've printed official-looking documents showing my north field as HOA property." Frank studied the map carefully. "This is concerning, James. Very concerning. Mrs. Lockhart claims I signed some agreement in 2008. I never signed anything." "We need to see this supposed agreement immediately." Frank picked up his phone and dialed the HOA's legal representative, putting the call on speaker. After explaining the situation, the response chilled me to the bone. "Yes, we have the documentation on file," the HOA lawyer said smoothly. "Mr. Richardson signed over usage rights to that parcel as part of a water access agreement. The HOA has been paying the property taxes on it since 2008. "That's a lie," I shouted. But Frank held up his hand for silence. "We'll need to see that document today," Frank insisted. "Certainly we have nothing to hide. We can arrange a meeting with the board for Wednesday evening." After we hung up, Frank turned to me. "Don't confront anyone until Wednesday. Document everything, but don't escalate. If they really have been paying taxes on that portion, this gets complicated." "They haven't," I insisted. "I pay taxes on every inch of my farm." "Then we'll prove that. Bring your tax records on Wednesday." I spent Tuesday at the county records office, gathering every document related to my property. The clerk, Mrs. Gonzalez, had known my family for years and helped me search through decades of records. "Something's not right," she said after several hours. "There's a notation here from 2009 referencing a boundary adjustment, but the supporting documentation is missing." My stomach dropped. "Missing how?" "It should be attached to this file. The system shows it was logged, but the actual papers aren't here." She frowned. "That almost never happens." "Who requested that file last?" I asked. Mrs. Gonzalez checked the log. "Judge Lockhart's clerk. About a month ago." Judge Lockhart, Mrs. Lockhart's husband. The pieces were starting to fit together, and the picture they formed made me sick. Wednesday evening arrived with dark clouds threatening rain. Fitting weather for the confrontation ahead. The HOA meeting room was packed with residents, many of whom gave me cold stares as I entered with Frank. Mrs. Lockhart presided at the front table alongside 4 other board members, including Mr. Thompson, a retired banker whose property backed up to my east field. I'd had run-ins with Thompson before, when his grandchildren repeatedly let their dog chase my chickens. "We'll address the Richardson matter first," Mrs. Lockhart announced, her voice carrying across the room. "Mr. Richardson claims we've encroached on his property by establishing our community campsite." "It's not a claim, it's a fact," I said firmly. Mrs. Lockhart smiled thinly. "Let's review the facts, shall we?" She slid a document across the table. "This agreement, signed by you in 2008, clearly grants the community recreational usage rights to the North Field in exchange for water access across HOA property." Frank picked up the paper while I leaned in to look. There at the bottom was what appeared to be my signature, except it wasn't. Closed, but definitely not mine. "That's not my signature," I stated loudly. The room erupted in whispers. Mr. Thompson crossed his arms and scoffed. "Are you accusing the board of forgery, Richardson? That's a serious charge. I'm stating a fact. I didn't sign this." Frank studied the document. "Where's the notary seal? An agreement transferring property rights would require notarization." Mrs. Lockhart's smile faltered slightly. "It was an informal agreement at the time. The board simply kept a record." "Informal agreements don't grant legal property rights," Frank replied. "And my client has tax records proving he's paid taxes on that land continuously, with no contribution from the HOA." I pulled out my tax documents, but Mrs. Lockhart barely glanced at them. "The arrangement was that Mr. Richardson would continue paying the taxes while we maintained usage rights. It's all very standard." "There's nothing standard about this," I said. "You're trying to steal my land." Mr. Thompson stood up. "No one is stealing anything. This community needs recreational space for our families. Your unused field is perfect for our needs. Why are you being so difficult?" "Because it's my field," I shouted, losing my temper. "I grow wheat there. I have plans for that land." An older woman in the back raised her hand. "I've lived here since before Pinterest was built. That field has always belonged to the Richardson farm." Mrs. Lockhart shot her a glare. "Mrs. Patel, unless you have documentation to present, personal recollections aren't relevant." As the meeting devolved into arguing, I spotted my neighbor Elaine slipping in at the back. She caught my eye and subtly motioned toward the door. Frank noticed too. "Let's take a 5-minute break," he suggested loudly. Outside in the hallway, Elaine pulled me aside. "James, you need to know what's really happening. They're not just after your field for camping." "What do you mean?" "I overheard Mrs. Lockhart on the phone with a developer last week. They're planning to build luxury glamping cabins and charge residents premium fees. That's why they're pushing so hard." My blood ran cold. "They're trying to commercialize my property." Elaine nodded. "And there's more. Judge Lockhart has been helping behind the scenes using his connections to fast-track approvals." Frank, who had been listening, shook his head. "That's a serious conflict of interest." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Elaine. "Won't this get you in trouble with the HOA?" She smiled sadly. "They've made living here miserable for anyone who doesn't follow their rules perfectly. Last month, they fined the Millers $500 because their grass was half an inch too tall while they were away at a funeral." As we returned to the meeting room, I felt a new determination. This wasn't just about my field anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who were making life miserable for an entire community. Mrs. Lockhart resumed the meeting with a new announcement. "The board has voted to move forward with our community recreation plan for the North Field. If Mr. Richardson continues to interfere, will be forced to seek an injunction. On what grounds? Frank demanded. On the grounds that his interference is disrupting a community service that has been established for years. She smiled coldly at me. Judge Lockhart has already reviewed the case informally and sees no issue with our position. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. A judge, her husband, had informally reviewed a case involving her HOA. As the meeting ended, I watched residents file out, many avoiding eye contact with me. Mr. Thompson approached, standing too close. "You're fighting a losing battle, Richardson," he muttered. "This weekend is our annual summer barbecue. It's happening in the campsite area, whether you like it or not. Hundreds of people will be there, including county officials. Do yourself a favor and stay away." As he walked off, Elaine touched my arm. "Their lawyers will destroy you," she whispered. "Be careful." Walking home in the darkness, my mind raced with possibilities. I needed to find a way to prove my ownership before the weekend. As I approached my property, I noticed something new at the edge of my field. Workmen installing a permanent bathroom facility, their floodlights illuminating the area as they worked through the night. They were building structures on my land now. I took out my phone and began photographing everything, hands shaking with rage, when suddenly headlights appeared behind me. A vehicle approached slowly, stopping just inches from where I stood. The window rolled down, revealing Mrs. Lockhart's perfectly composed face. "Trespassing at night, Mr. Richardson. That's not very neighborly." "You're trespassing," Mrs. Lockhart said through her rolled-down window, her face lit by the glow of her dashboard. My heart pounded as I held up my phone. "I'm recording this conversation. This is my property, and I have the papers to prove it." She laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Your property ends at the creek. Check the county records, Mr. Richardson, and delete that recording if you know what's good for you." The Range Rover peeled away, leaving me alone in the darkness with nothing but questions and anger. Couldn't sleep that night. My grandpa's voice kept ringing in my ears. "This land feeds the family, Jimmy. Protect it with everything you've got." I pulled out the old wooden chest where we kept all the important papers. The original deed was there, yellowed with age, but crystal clear about the boundaries. My land stretched a full quarter-mile beyond the creek. At first light, I drove to the county clerk's office. Ms. Walker, who'd worked there for 30 years, greeted me with concern in her eyes. "Jimmy Richardson, you look like you haven't slept a wink." "The HOA says my Northfield isn't mine. I need to see the official records." Her face fell. "You're the third farmer this year with boundary disputes." "Let me pull everything we have." For 6 straight hours, I pored through dusty books and computer files. What I found made my blood run cold. The property maps had been changed 3 years ago. A small note indicated boundary adjustment per Municipal Code 47.3. But when I asked Miss Walker about that code, she couldn't find it in the books. "Something's not right here," she whispered, glancing around the empty office. "These changes need public hearings and notifications to property owners. Did you ever get any letters about this?" "Not a single one." She pulled up another screen. "The only person who accessed these records before the change was—" She stopped suddenly. "Who?" I pressed. "I shouldn't say, but check who was elected county records administrator 3 years ago." On my phone, I found the answer immediately. Judge Harold Lockhart. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely drive home. The pieces were falling into place. Judge Lockhart had access to change records. His wife ran the HOA that suddenly claimed my land, but they'd made one huge mistake. Back home, I pulled out Grandpa's irrigation maps. The water rights to the creek remained separately documented. I owned those rights, clear as day, and the entire irrigation system that fed the campsite area ran through my legally owned wetlands. Standing in my kitchen, looking at the maps spread across the table, I felt a strange calm settle over me. They might have connections and power, but I had truth and the law. My phone buzzed. A text from Elaine. Emergency HOA meeting tomorrow. They're voting to sue you. Need to talk now. I met her at the edge of my property away from prying eyes. Elaine looked nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. Jimmy, it's worse than we thought. Mrs. Lockhart brought a special legal consultant to the last meeting. They're claiming adverse possession. What's that? It means if someone uses your land openly for a certain period without you stopping them, they can claim it legally. They're saying the HOA has been maintaining that area for years. That's a lie. I've been farming that land every season. I know, but they've got photographs showing HOA landscapers they're going back 5 years. Doctored, obviously. But who's going to question them with Judge Lockhart backing it all? Rain began to fall as we talked, soaking through my jacket. Elaine huddled closer under her umbrella. There's more, she said. They're planning a community celebration on the campsite this weekend. It's a show of force establishing their claim publicly. I kicked at the muddy ground, watching water pool around my boots. Water. The idea hit me like lightning. Elaine, who approved the plumbing permits for that bathroom they built? She thought for a moment. The county inspector, I guess. Why? Because that bathroom drains into my wetlands and I control the water flow. Her eyes widened. Jimmy, what are you thinking of doing? I stared across my land toward where strangers now camped freely. I'm not sure yet, but they picked the wrong farmer to mess with. That evening, I crawled under my house with a flashlight, studying the old plumbing diagrams. The irrigation channels that fed the camping area could be redirected with a few turns of key valves located on my undisputed property. As darkness fell, I walked the boundaries of my land, marking each valve location with small flags. A plan was forming in my mind, but I needed more information. I called my old friend Tom at the Water District. I need to understand exactly how the drainage works on my north field. That's a sensitive area, Jimmy. Natural wetlands. Anything that disrupts the flow could cause problems. What kind of problems? Let's just say water always finds its way downhill and it takes everything with it. I was about to thank him and hang up when he added, By the way, I got a call from the county asking about your water rights. Someone's very interested in them right now. My stomach dropped. Who called? Didn't leave a name, but the request came from Judge Lockhart's office. They were moving fast. I needed to move faster. The next morning, my lawyer called. Her voice was tight with tension. Jimmy, we've got trouble. Judge Lockhart denied our emergency injunction. The camping continues and they're fast-tracking the adverse possession claim. How is that possible? He's married to the HOA president. That's a clear conflict of interest. He should have recused himself. Absolutely. But in this county, who's going to challenge him? I watched through my kitchen window as more cars pulled up to my north field. People unloaded coolers and folding chairs. Children ran across land that had been in my family for generations. What now? I asked. We appeal, but it takes time. Meanwhile, they're establishing their claim every day. They use that land. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, head in my hands. Grandpa's words came back to me. Sometimes a farmer has to work with nature to solve problems. Outside my window, dark clouds gathered. A storm was coming, and I knew exactly how to use it. Lightning flashed across the sky as Elaine rushed into my kitchen. Raindrops glistening in her hair. She slammed a folder down on the table. They're planning to bulldoze your winter wheat next week, she said, breathing hard. I snuck these papers from Mrs. Lockhart's printer. I flipped through construction plans labeled Pinarest Gardens Luxury Glamping Experience. My stomach twisted as I saw detailed drawings of my entire north field transformed into fancy camping platforms with private fire pits. How did you get these? Elaine's eyes darted to the window. I clean Mrs. Lockhart's house on Tuesdays. She left them out. Jimmy, there's more. They've already sold memberships. Rich folks from the city paid thousands for exclusive nature experiences starting next month. The rain hammered against the roof as we spread the papers across my kitchen table. There it was in black and white. A complete plan to steal my land and profit from it. "Why are you helping me?" I asked suddenly. "You're risking a lot." Elaine's face hardened. "My grandparents lost their farm to similar tricks 20 years ago. Died heartbroken. I won't watch it happen to another family." My phone buzzed. A weather alert. Flash flood warning for the county. I walked to the window and watched water already pooling in the yard. "Have you seen Judge Lockhart's signature on any documents?" I asked. "No, he's careful. Mrs. Lockhart handles everything publicly. But look at this." She pointed to tiny initials at the bottom of each page. "HL reviewed." "We need more proof," I said. "Something that directly connects them." Elaine nodded. "The HOA summer barbecue is tomorrow afternoon. They're still having it. Rain or shine, Mrs. Lockhart already rented giant tents for the campsite on my land." "Yes, and she's invited county commissioners and business leaders, even a reporter from the local paper." I felt a plan forming. "What time does it start?" "3 tons. Mrs. Lockhart gives her big speech at 4 Why? What are you thinking?" I walked to my grandfather's old desk and pulled out a worn leather journal. "These are all the original irrigation plans. My grandfather designed a system that naturally filtered water through the wetlands before reaching the creek." Elaine looked confused. "How does that help us?" "When they built that bathroom, they hooked into my irrigation system without permission. The pipes crossed through the legally undisputed part of my property before reaching the north field." Understanding dawned on her face. "So you control the water flow?" "Exactly. And with this storm." I glanced out at the increasingly heavy rainfall. "Jimmy, what exactly are you planning to do?" I showed her the journal pages. "I'm not going to do anything illegal. I'm simply going to restore the original water flow patterns by disconnecting their unauthorized pipes from my system." "And what will happen then?" "Nature will take its course. Water always flows downhill." The next morning brought even heavier rain. From my kitchen window, I watched workers struggling to set up party tents in my north field. Mrs. Lockhart supervised from her Range Rover, occasionally rolling down the window to shout orders. I put on my heaviest raincoat and boots and headed to the barn. The old irrigation control panel was hidden behind stacks of hay bales. Grandfather had installed it decades ago. A simple system of levers and valves that could direct water flow across different parts of the farm. For an hour, I studied the diagrams, making sure I understood exactly what would happen. I wasn't going to pump sewage anywhere. That would be illegal. I was simply going to disconnect pipes that never should have been connected to my system in the first place. At noon, I made my move. 3 valves needed adjusting. The first 2 were easy, located in my barn. The third required me to crawl under the old equipment shed. Mud soaked through my clothes as I worked the rusted valve handle. As I emerged, I spotted Mr. Thompson watching me from the edge of my property. Our eyes met across the rainy field. He knew something was happening but wasn't sure what. By 2:00, cars began arriving for the barbecue. Workers had managed to set up the tents, though water already puddled underneath them. A catering truck backed up to the illegal bathroom building, which now served as a makeshift food prep area. I watched through binoculars from my upstairs window. The final piece of my plan relied on the storm continuing. As if answering my thoughts, thunder rumbled overhead, and the rain intensified. At 3:00, the barbecue officially began. Despite the weather, at least 50 people huddled under the tents. Mrs. Lockhart moved from group to group, radiant in a red dress and white cardigan, introducing people to each other. I noticed something odd through my binoculars. The ground around the bathroom building had begun to darken. Water was backing up just as I'd calculated. The natural flow patterns restored to their original design. Couldn't handle the combination of heavy rain and plumbing use. My phone rang. It was Elaine. "Jimmy, are you seeing this? The ground is getting really soggy." "I'm watching. Mrs. Lockhart just got mud all over her shoes. She's furious. blaming the catering company. I almost felt sorry for the catering staff. Almost. At 10 minutes to 4 Fard, Mrs. Lockhart took the small stage they'd set up. Everyone gathered closer to hear her speak over the rain pounding on the tent. "Friends and neighbors," she began. "Welcome to the first annual Pinerist Gardens Summer Celebration. This beautiful community space represents our vision for the future." She never finished her sentence. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as the first person noticed what they were standing in. The backed-up water had mixed with contents from the overloaded septic system, creating a foul-smelling mess that was rapidly spreading across the entire area. Chaos erupted. People scrambled to higher ground. Expensive shoes ruined. Children crying. Food carts abandoned. Mrs. Lockhart stood frozen on the stage, her face a mask of shock and rage. That's when the local newspaper photographer invited to cover the fancy event started taking pictures. Perfect timing. Sheriff Daniels arrived 20 minutes later. By then, Mrs. Lockhart was screaming about sabotage and pointing at my house. The sheriff trudged through the mess to my front door, looking thoroughly unhappy. "Mr. Richardson," he said when I opened the door, "Mrs. Lockhart is claiming you've deliberately flooded the community area with sewage." I invited him in out of the rain and spread my grandfather's journals and irrigation maps on the table. "Sheriff, I simply restored the original water flow on my legal property. The HOA connected their plumbing to my irrigation system without permission. Here are the original designs, and here's my water rights documentation. The storm did the rest." He studied the papers, frowning. "This property dispute has been going on too long. Mrs. Lockhart says this land belongs to the HOA now." "Sheriff, has anyone actually seen the documents that prove that?" "Because I've got the original deed right here." I pulled out the yellowed paper from my grandfather's chest. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Judge Lockhart signed off on the boundary change. His wife runs the HOA that benefits from that change. Isn't that a conflict of interest?" Before he could answer, his radio crackled. The county environmental inspector had arrived at the barbecue site and was asking for him urgently. An hour later, the sheriff returned. His expression had changed completely. "Mr. Richardson, the inspector found multiple code violations in that bathroom facility. No proper permits, improper sewage disposal into protected wetlands. There's going to be a full investigation." Relief flooded through me, stronger than the rain outside, as Sheriff Daniels left. I noticed Mr. Thompson taking photographs of me from his car parked across the street. His face was twisted with fury. This wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope. Sometimes justice flows like water, finding every crack in the lies people build and washing them away when you least expect it. My hands shook as I gripped the pipe wrench at 5:00 a.m. The birds hadn't even started singing yet. This wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about protecting what had been in my family for 3 generations. Would you walk away if someone tried to steal your grandfather's legacy? I crawled through the wet grass to reach the maintenance point, hidden behind a cluster of oak trees. The metal access cover was heavy, but anger gave me strength. Inside, I could see the illegal plumbing. The HOA had installed without a single permit. They'd connected their fancy new bathroom facility directly to the main sewer line, cutting across my wetlands without permission. "This is technically tampering," whispered a voice in my head. But was it really tampering if they had no right to install it in the first place? I didn't redirect sewage that would be illegal. I simply disconnected the pipes they had no permission to install and restored the natural water flow through my wetlands. The backed-up system would do the rest when people started using those bathrooms. Nature can be messy when humans try to change how water moves. My phone buzzed. A text from Elaine. They're setting up early, bringing in a chocolate fountain and a live band. Mrs. Lockhart ordered champagne. I felt sick to my stomach. Not because of what I'd done, but because they were so confident they'd won. My grandfather's photo seemed to watch me from my wallet as I walked back to the house. "I won't let them take what you built," I promised him. By 11 a.m., luxury cars filled the makeshift parking area they created by cutting down 3 of my apple trees. Children ran with balloon animals while caterers set up tables with fancy foods. The stage had a banner that read Pinerist, Garden's annual victory celebration. Victory. This was my land. Mrs. Lockhart arrived wearing a white pants, suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her husband, Judge Lockhart, shook hands and laughed with people who slapped his back. Mr. Thompson directed teenagers where to place games and activities. Nobody noticed the soggy patches appearing near the bathrooms. I sat on my porch with binoculars, watching as Mrs. Lockhart took the stage at exactly noon. The microphone squealed as she tapped it. "Welcome, neighbors!" Her voice boomed through speakers they'd mounted on my trees. "Today we celebrate another successful year of making Pinerist Gardens the most desirable community in the county." People clapped. I zoomed in with my binoculars, and I'm thrilled to announce that next spring we'll begin construction on our exclusive members only glamping retreat right here on this beautiful land. A child screamed near the bathrooms. At first people ignored it, thinking it was just play. Then a mother yelled. The ground around the portable toilets had turned dark and wet. A horrible smell drifted across the party as sewage began pooling around expensive shoes and picnic blankets. Through my binoculars, I watched Mrs. Lockhart's face change from confusion to horror. Judge Lockhart covered his nose. Mr. Thompson slipped and fell, trying to redirect children away from the mess. "Everyone stay calm." Mrs. Lockhart's voice cracked through the speakers. "It's just a small plumbing issue," but it wasn't small. As more people used the bathrooms, more sewage backed up. The chocolate fountain was abandoned as people grabbed their belongings and ran for their cars. I called Sheriff Daniels myself. "Sir, there's a situation at my farm. The HOA has installed illegal plumbing on my property, and it appears to be malfunctioning badly." When Sheriff Daniels arrived 30 minutes later, the party was in chaos. Mrs. Lockhart's white pantsuit had brown spots up to her knees. She pointed at me as soon as she saw me walking down from my house. "He did this. He sabotaged our event." Sheriff Daniels looked tired. "Mrs. Lockhart, do you have permits for this plumbing work?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I handed the sheriff my folder of documents. "This is my property line survey from 1978, when my grandfather bought this land. This is the water rights certificate showing I control all water flow through the creek and wetlands. And this is where they installed plumbing without permits, environmental impact studies, or my permission." The sheriff flipped through the papers and nodded slowly. "Mr. Richardson here says he disconnected unauthorized plumbing on his legal property." Sheriff Daniels told Mrs. Lockhart, "Did you get permits for this work?" Judge Lockhart stepped forward. "Daniel, surely we can discuss this like reasonable." "That's Sheriff Daniels to you right now, Judge," the sheriff interrupted. "And I'm asking about construction permits." As people loaded crying children into cars, I noticed Mr. Thompson taking photos of me from across the field. His face was twisted with hate. "This means war," he mouthed at me before turning away. I should have been scared. The HOA had money, power, and connections, but watching them flee from my land, covered in their own mess, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. "Hope," the sheriff wrote in his notebook, as environmental officers arrived to assess the damage. "You might want to lawyer up," he whispered to me. "They won't take this lying down." Little did I know just how right he was. The lawsuit hit me 3 days after the sewage disaster. Mrs. Lockhart's lawyer delivered it personally, smirking as I signed for the envelope. Inside was a novel of legal language that basically accused me of everything short of murder. Would you believe they wanted $2 million for intentional infliction of emotional distress? My stomach twisted into knots as I called every lawyer in the county for refused to take my case when they heard I was up against Judge Lockhart. The fifth, a young woman named Maria Vasquez agreed to meet me. "They're banking on you giving up," Maria said, scanning the lawsuit in her tiny office above the hardware store. "But they made mistakes, big ones." She pointed to a paragraph about property lines. "They're citing a deed modification from 2008 that you supposedly signed." "Did you?" "Never," I insisted. "I've never signed anything giving away my land." Maria's eyes sparkled. "Then we have them for fraud. But we need proof." That afternoon, my doorbell rang. Elaine stood there with a nervous-looking woman I'd never seen before. "This is Diane," Elaine said quickly. "She used to be Mrs. Lockhart's assistant at the HOA office. She has something you need to see." Diane's hands trembled as she placed a USB drive on my kitchen table. "Mrs. Lockhart made me scan all HOA documents when I started 4 years ago," she whispered, "including ones she said were private board matters that I should never mention." The files contained years of emails between Mrs. Lockhart and her husband discussing their plan to acquire my Northfield for development. One email from Judge Lockhart read, "No one will check the signature too closely. Just make sure the property description matches what we need." Couldn't believe my eyes. This is actual evidence of forgery." Diane nodded. "They fired me last month when I questioned an invoice for the bathroom facility. Said I was being disloyal." The EPA investigators arrived the next day, drawn by Sheriff Daniels' report of unauthorized sewage discharge. They found chemicals in the wetlands that had been killing fish and frogs for months. When they tracked the pollution to pipes the HOA had installed, the story got picked up by local news. HOA accused of environmental violations and document fraud. Read the headline. My phone rang constantly with calls from reporters. Judge Lockhart suddenly announced he was recusing himself from all property cases due to personal matters. Mrs. Lockhart's social media went silent. The real earthquake came during the emergency community meeting called to address the recent regrettable events. I sat in the back, feeling every stare and whisper as I entered. Mrs. Lockhart stood at the front. Her voice honeyed as she explained that miscommunications had led to unfortunate misunderstandings. That's when Mrs. Patel, a former board member who had moved to a condo last year, stood up clutching a leather portfolio. "I kept copies of everything," she announced, her voice shaking but determined. "Every meeting where we were told to approve projects without proper review. Every time Mrs. Lockhart changed minutes after we'd signed them. Every dollar spent on consulting fees to companies owned by her brother-in-law." The room erupted. People jumped to their feet, shouting questions and accusations. Mr. Thompson tried to quiet everyone, but his authority had vanished. "My sister lost her koi pond because Mrs. Lockhart said it violated HOA rules," one woman yelled. Then Mrs. Lockhart built the exact same pond in her backyard the next month. "They fined me $500 for parking my work truck overnight when my mother was in the hospital," shouted another man. Years of resentment poured out like floodwater breaking through a dam. Over the next weeks, as investigations deepened, neighbors stopped by my farm. Some brought apologies, others brought pies and casseroles. Many shared stories of HOA, bullying and selective rule enforcement. The County Land Office restored my original property lines after reviewing evidence of document tampering. Mrs. Lockhart and Judge Lockhart quietly put their house up for sale and moved to Florida. Mr. Thompson resigned from the board, citing health concerns. Elaine organized a community meeting at the library to discuss healing the neighborhood. More than 50 people attended. What if we created a community garden space? Someone suggested a real one with proper agreements and permits. I turned to me. I thought about my grandfather who believed farmland should feed communities. "I might be willing to lease an acre," I said slowly, "with a real contract and respect for the land." The following spring, Elaine helped coordinate a proper lease agreement for a corner of my property furthest from the wetlands. Families planted vegetables and flowers in neatly marked plots. Children learned about growing food. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Patel, created transparent rules and fair enforcement procedures. The day the backhoe arrived to remove the illegal bathroom facility, I watched from my porch with mixed feelings. The legal battles weren't completely over, but the criminal investigation into document fraud had Mrs. Lockhart and her husband negotiating plea deals. Elaine brought me a cup of cider made from my own apples and sat beside me. "You could have given up," she said quietly. "Most people would have." I sipped the sweet cider, watching a group of kids learning how to plant tomato seedlings in the community garden space. It wasn't just about the land, I realized aloud. It was about standing up to bullies who thought rules didn't apply to them. The sewage incident hadn't been my proudest moment, but sometimes I thought, as I watched new life taking root in properly cared for soil, you have to get your hands dirty to grow something good.